Hello everyone and welcome to our Facebook Live session. Today we're going to talk about IELTS reading questions, true, false or not given. I'm Kasia Woźniak and today we're joined by Pete Jones. Hello Pete.
Hi, how are you, Kasia?
Yes, I'm very good. And how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Yes. Pete, if you could just tell us a bit about you and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I'm here in Auckland, New Zealand, and talking about what has become my favorite subject, I think, which is IELTS and anything related to the IELTS test. It's what I spend a lot of my time thinking about and helping people with. So I've been working with IELTS students and IELTS teachers since 2003, both online and in the classroom. And so, you know, over that time, I've helped a lot of students and got a really good idea around the kinds of challenges that students have when preparing for the IELTS test, and have worked with them to find ways that can make it a little bit easier. So I'm happy to be here sharing some of that experience today.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, today's session is about answering true, false or not given reading questions. Pete, so if I am a test taker and I find those type of questions difficult, where do I start?
Yeah, well, today is about that particular type of IELTS reading question, the true, false or not given question. But the question where to start is really a question for the IELTS reading test. And I think the answer to that is really understanding the different types of question and understanding that different types of question test different reading skills. And so if we're looking at the true, false, not given question, we need to think about, well, what is that testing? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. We also need to think about where people go wrong with it or what problems they have. And the problems people often have are they spend too long looking for answers in the text, or they can't tell the difference between a false answer and a not given answer. And obviously this affects how many answers they get correct, but it also uses up a lot of time and leaves less time for other questions. So today is all about understanding what true, false, not given questions are, and an approach to answering them in a way that will hopefully result in getting more answers correct in less time. And it applies to both the IELTS academic test and the IELTS general training reading test. So just thinking about the definitions there of true, false, not given. This type of reading question tests your ability to find and understand detailed information in the text. I'll just say that again because that part's really important. It tests your ability to find and understand detailed information in the text. And usually you're given at least 3 statements, and for each statement you need to decide if it's true. And you can see there the definition of true that you'll see in your reading test is that the statement agrees with the information in the text. You need to decide if it's false, the statement contradicts the information in the text, or if it's not given, that there's no information on this. So the text in black there on the screen that you can see is what you'll see in the reading test. I actually think it's easier to think of these definitions in a slightly different way, and that's the text in green that you can see. So true means the statement is the same as the information in the text. False means the statement is opposite to the information in the text, so we know that it's not true. And not given means that there is different information about something in the statement. This last point's really important because there's always something in the text about something in the statement, and we're going to see an example of that shortly. So what we're going to do today is talk through a simple 4-step process in how to answer true, false, or not given questions. And your job, and I'm going to give you some, everyone watching today, I'm going to give you some practice to answer some true, false, not given questions. So those are the definitions of true, false, and not given. And we're going to look at some examples today, and we're going to go through a 4-step process to answering these questions. And the text we're going to look at is an IELTS general training text, and it's about the history of the Olympics, the sporting event, the Olympics, and particularly the Winter Olympics. But don't worry if you haven't seen the text, because we're going to have a look at parts of it in a minute. And don't worry if you're preparing for the IELTS academic test, because the process we go through today also is useful for true, false, not given questions in the academic test. So Kasia, if you could show our 3 statements, and we need to decide if they're true, false, not given by looking at the text. And the first step in the process that I want to show you today is to think about where to start. And if you've already looked at the text, which you might have done in the test, you might have an idea where some of this information is. But if you look at the questions first, which I know a lot of people do, or if you can't remember in the text where this information is, you need to think about what is going to be the easiest and quickest thing to look for. So my question to everyone watching is, in those 3 statements, which word or words are going to be the quickest and easiest thing to look for in the text? So what you've got to think about is the topic of the text is the Olympics. Now I imagine that word will appear in that text many, many, many times. So finding the right part of that text, the right use of that word Olympics, is going to be very time consuming. It's going to take you a lot of time. You might have to check 20 places. So I think there's only one word there that's going to be quick and easy to find in the text that will give you the right part of the text to read. And that's the Antwerp Games. That's, if you could go on to the next slide, Kasia, I think we've highlighted that. The Antwerp Games is going to be quick and easy to find because it's going to be exactly the same in the text, because it's a name and it's got capital letters. If you are looking for Olympics, you're going to see that many, many times in the text because it's the topic of the text. If you look for any other words like spectator or athletes, there may be, they may not use that word in the text. They may use a word with a similar meaning, a synonym. And synonyms are harder to look for. And and you may not even know that synonym. So you may be looking for a word that you don't know. So the quickest and easiest things to look for are always words that are going to be exactly the same in the text and hopefully only appear once. Those are usually names of places, people, events, dates, numbers. So those are the things to look for. And what's important here is that it might not be in the first statement. So statement 1 might not be the first place to start. It might be much easier to start with statement 3, like in this case. So once you've decided on what you're going to look for, which is step 1 of the process, step 2 of the process is to look at that statement and to think, what am I going to see in the text if the answer is true? Or what am I going to see in the text if the answer is false? So, Kasia, if you could move on to the next slide. If we find Antwerp games in the text and we think about the answer being true, we will expect to see the same information but written in a different way. Now this, of course, is going to be more difficult if you don't know all of the words in the statement. If you don't know the word specialized, for example, it might be more difficult when you read the text to decide if the information is the same or not. But there is a clue here. We know that it says the winter sports, the Antwerp games proved the winter sports were too successful. So the word too tells us that there's too much of something, it's a problem. And so whatever the word specialized means, we know that there was too much of it. And so in other words, the winter sports didn't go well in the Antwerp games. So if the answer was false, I would expect to see the opposite information. And Kasia, if you could move on to the next slide.
Yep.
Thank you. So I would expect to see that the Antwerp games proved the opposite to that, so that they proved that the winter sports were not too specialized. So in other words, the winter sports went well in the Antwerp games. And if the answer was not given, and this part's really important, I would still expect to see something about the Antwerp games. I would still expect to find the Antwerp games in the text, but I would expect to see different information about the Antwerp games. Maybe it would talk about the summer sports at the Antwerp games, not the winter sports. Whatever it said, it wouldn't say whether the winter sports were too specialized or not. So that's step 2 of our process, and it's really important to do that because it helps you understand what to look for in the text. So we know we're going to look for Antwerp games, and we know what a true answer might look like, a false answer might look like, and a not given answer might look like.
Pete, this is all very interesting and very helpful. So now when we actually know what to do and what the first step is, are we ready to try an example?
I think so. I think when you're ready to, when you know what you're looking for and you know what you might see, you're ready to look. And once you've done this process a few times, it's actually really quite quick. So I've done the quick part for you. I know a lot of you are going to be watching this event on smartphones and not be able to read the text. So I've done step 3 for you. I've scanned the text and I found Antwerp games, and I've written the part in red that you need to read on the screen, just the text in red. The part of the text about the Antwerp Games. So if you read that text in red, your job is to decide, is that the same as statement 3? So true. Is that the opposite to statement 3? So false. Or is it different information about the Antwerp Games? So not given. And this part this part is important to take your time. Read slowly, read carefully, maybe read it more than once.
Okay, Pete, do you think you could repeat the question?
Yeah, so if you read that text in red, is that the same information as statement 3 above? So the answer is true. Is it the opposite information to the statement 3 above? So false. Or is it different information about the Antwerp Games? So the answer is not given. So the answer is false because it says that some winter sports, so skating and ice hockey, they were successfully included in the Antwerp Games. So the Antwerp Games proved that the winter sports were not too specialized. It's the opposite. Some winter sports were successful. Of course, many people believed that winter sports were too specialized, but that's not the statement. The statement is about the Antwerp Games. And it says that ice hockey and skating were both successful in the games. So the answer is false. So for those of you that would like another go, there's another chance here. Now, of course, step 1 of the process, again, we're going to go back to step 1, is to think about what words are easy and quick to find. But in statements 1 and 2, there aren't any words that are going to be easy and quick to find because maybe they're going to use synonyms in the text, words with similar meanings. We do know, however, there is a clue to where these are. We now know where the answer to statement 3 is, and the best place to start looking for statements 1 and 2 is before that in the text. True, false, or not given questions are generally in the same order as the information in the text. So we started with statement 3 because it was the easiest to find. Statements 1 and 2 are more difficult to find because they might not have the same words as in the statement, but we know they are before statement 3 in the text, and this makes it easier. So in a moment we're going to look at the text again, but we need to do step 2 in the process. We need to think about what we expect to see if the answer is true, false, or not given. So, for example, for number 1, if the answer was true, I would expect to see that in the ancient Olympics, only men could take part or watch the ancient Olympics. If it was false, I would expect to see that not only men could take part or watch, so maybe women could watch or women could take part. If it was not given, I would expect to see maybe something about the spectators, people watching the games, but not about who they were. So maybe that spectators enjoyed the games, or there were many spectators watching the games, but it didn't say whether they were men or women. So that's step 2 of the process, to think about whether what we expect to see if it's true, false, or not given. And now step 3 of the process is a step I've done for you. I have found that information in the text because I know you guys are going to be watching on smartphones and not be able to see it. So I found that information. I found the word amateur, and I found a paragraph that talked about men and women and watching the games. I didn't see the word spectator. So your job, step 4 of the process, is to read the right parts of the text very carefully, which we'll show you now, and decide for statements 1 and 2, is it true, false, or not given? So for those of you that are not sure, I'm just going to give you a little bit of help before we share the right answers. For statement 2, it says only amateur athletes are allowed to compete. So if that answer was true, I would expect to see the same information. So it would say only amateur athletes, not other athletes, so not other types of athletes. If the answer was false, I would expect to see something directly saying that other types of athletes are allowed to take part as well. So maybe amateur and professional athletes. So it would definitely talk about 2 types of athletes being allowed to take part. Not given, it might talk about amateur athletes, or it might talk about who could compete, but it wouldn't give us the whole picture. It wouldn't say whether it was only amateur athletes or not. And so one way to help you do this is to turn statement 2 into a question. So if I do that and I say, are only amateur athletes allowed to compete in the modern Olympics? Number 1 is true. It says directly that women could not take part, so they could not be a participant, and they could not go to the games, so they couldn't watch the games. They couldn't be a spectator. So that means the spectators and the participants had to be men or male. So the answer is true. For number 2, the answer is not given. And the reason for this is because it doesn't say which athletes can take part. It doesn't say whether it's amateur athletes or professional athletes. It tells us which type of sports. It talks about amateur sport, but it doesn't tell us directly what type of athletes can take part in those sports. So the answer is not given. It says athletes from every nation. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't talk about the type of athlete. You know, the opposite to amateur athlete is a professional athlete. So an amateur athlete doesn't get paid, and a professional athlete does get paid. In every country, you have amateur athletes and professional athletes. But in the text, it doesn't contrast those two or compare them. And the statement, the word only is very important here. The statement is saying only this type of athlete. And so in the text, we need to see the same thing, or the exact opposite. We need to see not only this type of athlete for it to be false.
Okay, so I'm thinking, Pete, if possible, if you could just tell us a few words how to effectively approach the answering of those questions, just as a recap maybe for people.
Yeah, so the process is, and it's a 4-step process, and I use it myself, both general training and academic, and it saves time because you know what to look for, what's the easiest thing to look for, and it forces you to read the right parts of the text very carefully, and it gives you time to do that because you find the right part of the text quickly. So the process is, and this is the process we went through today.
Yeah, I have this very nice slide. I'm going to put it up.
Yep.
Yeah. Of the
So the process is, the first thing is to decide what to look for and where to look. And the easiest and quickest things to look for are always words that will be the same, exactly the same in the text. So names, names of places, names of people, names of events, dates, numbers. Ideally, they would only be in the text once or twice. Once you've found the easiest and quickest thing to look for, and that might not be in the first statement, it might be in the second statement, or like today, the third statement, you need to think about, what do I expect to see in the text? If it's true, what am I going to see? If it's false, what am I going to see? If it's not given, what am I going to see? Then you need to scan the text to find the answer. And that's the part I did for you today, because when you're watching on a smartphone, I can't show you a whole text to read. So you need to scan to find the answer. And once you've found the answer, you need to read that part of the text slowly and carefully, and probably more than once. The way to save time here is on step 1 and step 2 and step 3. It isn't step 4. Step 4 is the part that takes the time. And when you get to the end of that process, I think you would have certainly found the answers quicker, and hopefully be more confident with your answers. But you should still expect not to be 100% confident with all of your answers, because as you've seen today, they're quite challenging questions to see the difference between those 3 answers: true, false, and not given.
Pete, when it comes to actually answering the questions, what do people need to put in the answers? So is Y enough for yes, meaning true, or is T enough to say true? Could you maybe tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think I've often had candidates ask me after the exam, they did the exam, and then after the exam they say, oh, Pete, I put the answer, for a true, false, not given question, I put yes or no, or not given. And they're obviously worried that they've got all of the answers wrong. So it's okay if the answer's true and you put Y or you put yes, that's correct. So don't worry about that. Also, if the answer's false and you put N or you put no, that's correct. So you don't need to worry about that. If you're doing the test on paper, the quickest and easiest thing to put is T, F, and NG. Just make sure that your handwriting is clear so that the T doesn't look like the F. I'm saying that because I've seen answers where the T and the F look too similar, and you have to mark them wrong. So it's clear handwriting is important for the reading test if you're taking the test on paper.
Yeah, definitely be careful with your handwriting. Okay, fantastic. And Pete, if people want to hear more from you, where they can find you?
Also, the best place is to have a look at my website and sign up for my newsletter. So my website is freeieltscourse.com. And on the homepage there you can sign up to my newsletter. Just put in your first name and your email address. And then I'll send you some emails showing you the different resources that I have available. So the free IELTS course, my blog, YouTube videos, IELTS ebooks. Kasia, just before we go, there was one interesting question there. Someone asked before, I don't know if you can find it now, but someone asked, are there any tips to scan quickly?
Yes. Yes, to scan fast. That was Firas, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you... Oh, great. So Firas, thank you for the question. And I think that's a really useful question, because this is where you can save time. Something I've read and tried myself, and it actually is worth trying, is to scan backwards. So if you're looking for the word Antwerp Games, as we were looking for today, and you don't know where it is in the whole text, if you start from the back of the text and go backwards, just looking for that word, it's actually quicker, because it stops you reading things. It stops you trying to read sentences or read parts of the text. It forces you to just find that word. So scanning, not reading backwards, but scanning a text backwards can help you find particular words more quickly.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Pete. I'm afraid that is it from us today. We will be answering the questions just after the session, and there were a few questions when the next session will be. So I think the easiest way is to go to our Facebook official page and give that page a like, and you will get the reminders and information about our future sessions. Thank you to everyone who joined us today and participated. It was a great session. Big thank you to Pete. I think he deserves a good night's sleep now. And join us for our next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kasia. Bye-bye.